Brandon Victor Swanson was born on January 30th, 1989, to Brian and Annette Swanson in Spencer, Iowa. He was the older of two children, with a younger sister named Jameen. The Swanson family later settled in Marshall, a small town in Lynd County in southwestern Minnesota, where Brandon spent most of his life. In May 2007, Brandon graduated from Marshall Senior High School. That August, he began attending the Wind Energy program at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, a small town located about 170 miles west of St. Paul. Growing up in Marshall, a quiet rural town of about 13,000 people surrounded by flat farmland and open fields, Brandon became deeply familiar with the area's highways, backroads, and countryside. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing around 120 pounds, he commuted regularly to his college, even though he had been blind in his left eye from birth due to congenital blindness. While he wore glasses to improve vision in his right eye, his depth perception was limited, especially in the dark. Despite this, he was self-reliant and never allowed the condition to hold him back. On May 13, 2008, the last day of classes at Minnesota West College, Brandon Swanson had every reason to be upbeat. He had just completed his first year and was ready to celebrate with friends. That evening, he joined a small group at a house in Lynd, Minnesota, rented by several friends. Those there said he was in a good mood, relaxed, sociable, and not intoxicated. Nothing unusual happened during the evening. Between 10:30 and 11 p.m., Brandon left alone to visit another friend in Canby, about 35 miles from Marshall. Later, before heading back home to Marshall, he called a different friend to let them know he was on his way. The drive was about 30 miles, with the most direct route, a 2-lane stretch of State Highway 68, cutting through miles of farmland and open countryside. It ran southeast from Canby to Marshall, a familiar path Brandon had taken many times before. Yet somewhere along the way, something went wrong. Whether he took a wrong turn or simply misjudged where he was, Brandon left the highway and ended up on a network of smaller rural roads. At night, these roads could be especially tricky. Many were unmarked, poorly lit, and easy to confuse, even for someone who knew the area. It's believed Brandon may have chosen back roads to avoid detection by law enforcement and the risk of a DUI charge. Unverified claims suggest he had a prior DUI arrest and had recently completed a year of probation. A second offense could have led to jail time or loss of his license. Some speculate that Brandon was warned at the party about law enforcement or state patrol conducting DUI checkpoints along Highway 68. Given his familiarity with the area, he may have also known from experience when and where police typically monitored traffic, further influencing his decision to avoid the main route. These gravel roads do not run parallel to the highway. Instead, they intersected at roughly a 45-degree angle, following east-west and north-south directions. As a result, navigating them required making multiple turns in a stair-step pattern to maintain a course similar to the highway's path. Brandon was driving west on a minimum maintenance road for about a mile. This road served as a field access route, situated between two large crop fields. While attempting to turn south onto a gravel road, he missed the field approach and ended up in a ditch at low speed. Although the ditch bank was shallow, it was steep enough that the car's frame became hung up, preventing the vehicle from moving forward or backward. Believing he was near Lynd, a small town about 10 miles southwest of Marshall, Brandon called his parents to ask for help. The Swansons got into their pickup truck and began driving toward the area while staying on the phone with Brandon. Brandon stayed near his car, flashing his lights to help his parents locate him. They tried doing the same, but neither side could see the other's signals. Over the course of a 47-minute call, Brandon described his surroundings in detail, including fences, open fields, and distant lights he believed were coming from Lynd. However, something didn't add up. As the Swansons drove through the area, they couldn't find any of the landmarks Brandon mentioned. They knew the region well, but nothing matched the terrain or visual cues Brandon described. Despite following his directions, they remained unable to locate him. At one point during the call, Brandon told them that he was just off Highway 23 on the left side of the road. This statement later raised questions, as his car was ultimately found off Highway 68, not Highway 23. suggesting he may have been disoriented and mistaken about both the highway and his orientation, possibly thinking he was facing south when he was not. At 2:17 a.m., after numerous attempts and growing frustration, Brandon told his mother he was leaving his car to walk toward the lights he could see in the distance, which he believed were from Lynd. He told his father to meet him at the parking lot of the Lyndwood Tavern, a local bar and grill in Lynd, where they planned to reunite. As Brandon started walking, he stayed on the phone with his parents, updating them on his progress toward town. He mentioned encountering 2 fence lines and noted the sound of running water nearby. At one point, he said he was leaving the road and cutting across open land, thinking it would be faster than following the road. Shortly after 3 a.m., the call took a sudden and alarming turn. Brandon abruptly exclaimed, "Oh shit," and the line went silent. Brandon Swanson later recalled, "I talked to him for 47 minutes, and all of a sudden he said, 'Oh shit,' and the phone went dead. There was nothing after that." Annette Swanson added, "It sounded like the phone fell, and as it fell, we could hear him say, 'Oh.' What did that mean? Did he fall into a ditch? Did he fall into the river? We don't know." Working on stories like this has made me think more deeply about mental health, especially how we deal with uncertainty, fear, or that feeling of being lost. When I started this channel, I had just graduated and had no job. For the first 2 years, the channel barely grew. I was honestly close to giving up. It felt like everyone else had moved on with their lives, and I was stuck. Eventually, things started picking up. I got a part-time job that gave me enough flexibility to focus on YouTube again, and slowly, it began to feel like maybe I hadn't made a mistake after all. But going through all that really made me think more seriously about mental health. How easy it is to feel overwhelmed or lost when life doesn't go the way you expected. That's where therapy comes in. BetterHelp, who's the paid partner of this video, makes starting therapy simple. You fill out a questionnaire and get matched with a credentialed therapist based on your needs. You can talk to them from wherever you are, and if it doesn't feel like the right fit, you can switch anytime at no extra cost. Head to betterhelp.com/Vuldar or click the link in the description to get 10% off your first month. Repeated attempts to reach Brandon's phone afterward resulted in ringing with no answer, suggesting the phone remained powered on. Lynd County Sheriff Eric Wallen confirmed, "I can say that his phone was functioning into the next day. I mean, you could place a call and it would ring before turning over to voicemail." Brandon Swanson was last seen in the early hours of Wednesday, May 14, 2008, wearing baggy jeans, a blue striped polo shirt, a black hooded sweatshirt, a white Minnesota Twins baseball cap, wire-rimmed glasses, and a sterling silver chain necklace. He has not been seen or heard from since. At 6:30 a.m., Brian and Annette Swanson reported Brandon missing to the Lynd County Sheriff's Office. But since Brandon was 19 and legally an adult, officers were initially dismissive. They suggested it wasn't unusual for someone his age to stay out after college finals, and one even remarked it was his right to be missing. Despite this, the Swansons continued searching on their own. Later that morning, Lynd police began searching the town and surrounding areas, but no trace of Brandon was found. That afternoon, his cell phone records were obtained, revealing that his calls had come from a completely different area than he had described. His phone had pinged a tower south of Minneota, near Taunton on State Highway 68. With this new information, the sheriff's office redirected the search toward Taunton. Around 12:30 p.m., deputies found Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina abandoned in a ditch about 1.5 miles north of Highway 68, near the Lyon-Lincoln County line. The location was later verified through GPS data, confirming the car had been left on a remote gravel road between Marshall and Canby. Lincoln County Sheriff Jack Wiecki noted that the car was hung up on the crest of an incline, with some of its wheels lifted off the ground. It was stuck, but undamaged. No keys or personal items were found in or around the vehicle. The surrounding grass and gravel showed no footprints or tire tracks. Sheriff Eric Wallen added that there were no signs of foul play, stating, "The vehicle simply looked like it was stuck in the ditch, or partially in the ditch. There was nothing odd about it. If a person passed by, they would think it was just parked there, or broken down and stuck." The search for Brandon Swanson quickly highlighted the challenges of rural southwestern Minnesota. The region was mostly farmland, with flat fields stretching endlessly in all directions. At night, the darkness turned those open fields into a confusing, featureless landscape. Farmhouses were spread out, and most roads were gravel tracks running through empty fields. As searchers focused near Brandon's abandoned car, Sheriff Joel Dahl noted that a red light atop a grain elevator in Taunton was visible from that location. It was believed that Brandon, unfamiliar with the terrain and walking in complete darkness, may have mistaken that light for one near Lynd, leading him to think he was headed in the right direction. Search dogs provided further direction, with one bloodhound following a defined trail, first heading south from the vehicle for about half a mile, then turning west onto 390th Street for roughly a mile. The trail shifted north onto County Road 16 for another half mile, before turning west into the driveway of an abandoned farm. From there, the scent continued northwest along the Yellow Medicine River. At one point, the dog entered the river, possibly indicating Brandon had done the same, but then came back out and continued tracking. In response, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources deployed boats to search the Yellow Medicine River and installed gates at key points to help with containment and tracking. That morning, parts of the river in Lincoln County measured around 10 feet deep, though water levels had since dropped. The trail stopped near a gravel road marking the boundary between Lincoln and Yellow Medicine counties. It was unclear whether this marked the end of Brandon's movement or simply where the dog's tracking ability failed. The spot where the dog briefly entered the river, considered a possible fall-in point, was within the estimated distance Brandon could have walked from his car. Brandon was talking about fences and water, so that is consistent with where we will search. There are fences in the area, there is water in the area, that's the only area the dogs are interested in, said Sheriff Dahl. Search teams believed it was highly likely that Brandon tripped, slipped, or stumbled over one of the many natural hazards in the area, causing him to drop his phone. It may have become unusable due to water damage, impact, or simple misplacement in the dark. However, the bloodhound indicated that Brandon's scent carried on beyond the river, suggesting he may have crossed it and kept moving. Combined with the possibility that he lost or damaged his phone, potentially during a fall, this supports the idea that Brandon, disoriented but still mobile, continued on foot after crossing the water. The scent trail implies that his disappearance didn't end at the river. The search for Brandon Swanson eventually spanned 122 square miles. The problem is that as time goes on, it becomes much more complicated to fulfill the search because you need to have canines that have experience in age scent, said Anderson, one of the search coordinators. Searches were scheduled around planting and harvest seasons to respect landowners. Still, not all farmers cooperated. They will not allow us on their property. We don't dispute the reason why. We try to work out a method that would make it acceptable, and we've not been able to come up with a working compromise, said Anderson. A single 160-acre field could require walking over 10 miles, often through mud or uneven terrain. In the fall of 2021, a drought caused the Yellow Medicine River to dry up, prompting an excavation by law enforcement. Like previous efforts, it yielded no evidence. Some believe there's strong evidence that Brandon might have fallen into a sinkhole, given the geological characteristics of the area. In parts of southwest Minnesota, limestone formations create karst terrain, landscapes where rivers can sometimes flow underground. According to this theory, Brandon may have stepped onto an unstable spot that gave way to an underground river or sinkhole. His cell phone might have landed nearby instead of falling in with him, which could explain why his parents initially heard only silence before hanging up. When they called back, the ringing or vibrations may have caused the phone to slip deeper into the hole. Advocates for the sinkhole theory point to other cases where people have vanished suddenly into the ground. In 2013, a man named Jeffrey Bush was sleeping in his bedroom in Seffner, Florida, when a massive sinkhole opened beneath his house, swallowing him and the entire room. His brother heard a scream and rushed in, but couldn't save him. Despite thorough search efforts, Jeffrey's body was never found. Critics argue that if a sinkhole large enough to swallow a person had formed in such exposed, open terrain, it likely would have been noticed during the extensive search efforts that followed. Still, others point out that Minnesota has a surprisingly high prevalence of sinkholes. one town reportedly had more sinkholes than residents. Although Brandon's scent trail leads through open terrain, a sinkhole just a few feet wide could have been obscured by brush, grass, or tree cover. It's also possible that a small, human-sized sinkhole, if it existed, may have partially filled in over time due to weather, erosion, or runoff. According to this theory, Brandon may have unknowingly stepped into a manure pit while crossing farmland that night. These pits can appear solid, but often collapse underfoot after a few steps. Since they're rarely drained completely, any remains would be difficult to recover. In 2015, 2 brothers in Wisconsin died after falling into a manure pit on their family farm. Experts say that decomposing manure, especially when exposed to sunlight, can accelerate the breakdown of bones and tissue, which could explain the absence of physical evidence. However, skeptics point out that there's no confirmed evidence of an active manure pit in the area where Brandon was last believed to be. Many rural properties contain old infrastructure such as wells, cisterns, or septic systems that are no longer in use. These structures may be unmaintained or improperly sealed, posing serious risks to anyone crossing unfamiliar land. A fall into one of these could explain the complete lack of physical evidence. It's possible his phone slipped from his hand and landed outside the opening during the fall, which might explain why the line remained connected for a short time. While there's no official suspicion of wrongdoing, some speculate that resistance from certain landowners to allowing searches may stem from fear of liability, particularly if a forgotten or illegal structure contributed to this fatal accident. Modern residential well casings are typically very narrow, around 4 to 6 inches in diameter, too small for a person to fall into, and only large enough for small animals. Larger wells, like those used for municipal or commercial purposes, are usually 16 to 20 inches wide, but are housed in buildings and secured, making them inaccessible to Brandon. The only type of well that might have been large enough is an old hand-dug well, often lined with brick or timber. Common in the 1800s, these wells would now be over a century old, and in most cases, have collapsed or been filled in. Minnesota law also requires property owners to properly cap or fill any abandoned wells or cisterns. A cistern is a slightly more plausible scenario. Older farms often had them, usually covered with wooden lids that could deteriorate and leave dangerous openings. However, extensive searches specifically looked for such hazards, and no open or uncovered cisterns were ever found. A local farmer suggested that Brandon might have fallen into a deep ditch dug for field tiling. In 2008, major tiling work was underway in the Taunton area, creating large ditches across open fields. At night, without lighting, these would have been nearly invisible. If Brandon had stumbled into one, he could have been unintentionally buried when it was later filled in by heavy machinery. However, critics point out that investigators and volunteers searched these areas but found no supporting evidence. In 2015, search teams focused on Mud Creek, a marshy area separate from the nearby river, located about 3.5 to 4 miles from Brandon's last known position. This area is thick with dense vegetation, waist to shoulder-high growth, that makes it extremely difficult to search. Law enforcement reportedly had to chop through large sections of overgrowth just to access certain parts, and cadaver dogs consistently led officers toward this area during multiple searches. However, because of how wind moves through the open marsh, the scent of possible human remains was scattered in all directions. As a result, the dogs reacted strongly but couldn't maintain a consistent trail, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint a specific location. Just before his call ended, Brandon reportedly mentioned hearing water, likely the Yellow Medicine River. His father also believed he heard the sound of unsteady movement, possibly indicating a fall. Brandon disappeared in mid-May, a time when the river is usually higher and faster due to melting snow from the winter. This seasonal surge can make the river wider, faster, and filled with debris, significantly increasing its danger. In the areas Brandon may have reached, the Yellow Medicine River maintains a continuous flow, further complicating any potential search and recovery. Based on these conditions, authorities believed that Brandon may have drowned in the river. They expected that if he had, either his body or phone would eventually have been recovered along the banks, but neither was found. If he had drowned near Taunton, the water control gates might have limited how far a body could drift, theoretically increasing the chance of recovery. Proponents of the drowning theory argue that even with focused search efforts, it is still possible for remains to go undiscovered. Bodies can become trapped under debris, buried in sediment, or hidden in difficult-to-access pockets of water. In rural areas like this, scavengers such as coyotes, vultures, and eagles may also scatter or conceal remains quickly. 2 years later, in March 2010, cadaver dogs traced Brandon's scent down to the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. They then picked it up again on the opposite bank, suggesting that Brandon may have successfully crossed the river. The trail continued for about a mile before the dogs lost the scent at a freshly graded gravel road. At that location, the dogs also showed strong interest in a field cultivator parked near the road. This led to speculation that Brandon or his remains may have come into contact with the equipment, possibly through accidental entanglement or later disturbance by farming activity. Unfortunately, further search was limited as the landowner of the adjacent field denied access to conduct a more thorough search. Later, cadaver dogs again picked up Brandon's scent, this time at a small creek and nearby field roughly 5 to 6 miles from the original river crossing. This suggested that Brandon may have traveled several miles beyond the river and deeper into agricultural terrain. However, a key landowner in this area also denied permission for a full search, further limiting access to potentially important ground. According to this theory, at some point during the night, Brandon likely crossed a river. He may have slipped into the water or swum through it briefly. Even limited contact in such low temperatures could have left him wet and cold. That night, it was around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Combined with damp clothing, exhaustion, and no shelter, the conditions could have quickly become dangerous. After crossing the river, Brandon may have continued walking. As his body temperature dropped, hypothermia could have set in. By the time he reached the area near 160th Street, his thinking and coordination may have already been affected. This theory suggests that Brandon may have died in the field that search teams were unable to access. Another theory suggests that Brandon may have unknowingly entered an abandoned or remote farmstead used for illegal activity. If so, someone might have confronted him, fearing he posed a threat. It's also been suggested that ammonia, commonly found on farms, could have been used to mask Brandon's scent trails. Brandon had tried to alert his parents by flashing his vehicle's lights. This has led to speculation that someone nearby, possibly involved in illicit activity, might have noticed the lights and approached Brandon out of suspicion or to protect their operation. Others suggest Brandon may have been unknowingly run over by farm machinery, hidden by darkness or tall vegetation, and never seen. This idea gained traction after cadaver dogs showed interest in a nearby cultivator during the search. The cultivator in question, commonly used in tillage, measures between 30 and 60 feet wide and can penetrate the soil up to 9 inches deep. Its tines and disc attachments are designed to break up and scatter surface material, meaning it could potentially disturb or disperse human remains without the operator even realizing it. Adding to this, by the time Brandon disappeared, many of the surrounding fields had already been planted. Under those conditions, any remains could have easily gone unnoticed or been disrupted during routine agricultural activity. It's rare for anyone with harmful intent to be out on remote farmland in the middle of the night. Also, critics note that it's hard to imagine a farmer hitting a human body without noticing. There would likely be visible signs or disrupted crops. Hiding such an accident would also serve no purpose, as it would only worsen the legal consequences. That said, it's not impossible. Some agricultural machines, like large combine tractors, have elevated seats and massive tires, allowing them to move across uneven ground with limited visibility below. On grassy or dirt-covered terrain, a machine could potentially pass over a body without the operator realizing it. Also, the scent on the machinery did not necessarily mean Brandon had been run over. The equipment could have picked up his scent simply by passing through a field where he had walked earlier, meaning it only confirmed his presence in that area. Some cite Brandon Swanson's inclusion in the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, as evidence that investigators suspect foul play, since VICAP tracks missing persons cases with signs of possible criminal involvement. Others argue his inclusion may have been due to Brandon's law, which requires Minnesota law enforcement to investigate missing persons cases immediately, regardless of age. They also note that VICAP includes cases involving highway disappearances or unexplained circumstances, even without confirmed violence, criteria that may fit Brandon's case. Interestingly, VICAP's summary mentions that Brandon's car doors were found open, a detail rarely seen in public records. But critics point out that in Minnesota, open often just means unlocked, not physically ajar. That distinction matters, as unlocked doors could suggest Brandon left voluntarily, possibly out of frustration or confusion. This theory suggests Brandon may have been hit by a vehicle on the road where tracking dogs lost his scent, possibly by someone avoiding law enforcement, who then moved his body to a nearby field to hide the incident. The abrupt stop in the scent trail has led some to believe Brandon may have entered a vehicle. However, this particular road had been graded the morning after he disappeared. Many argue that his scent would have lingered despite the addition of fresh gravel, as human scent can permeate more than just the road's surface. Others contend that the grading process may have disrupted the trail with strong competing odors like dust, diesel, oil, and tar. These smells, along with freshly disturbed soil, and the fact that dogs were tracking the scent 2 years later, may have diluted or overwritten Brandon's trail. It seems more likely the trail was disrupted by these odors, and the dogs lost his scent, not because he got into a vehicle, but because the markers had been obscured. Critics of this theory also point out that Brandon never mentioned seeing or hearing a car during his call with his father. As Sheriff Fizeki said, "I can't say there wasn't someone else there, but I can't find any evidence of it." A common question is why some farmers refused access to their land during the investigation. Many likely wanted to protect their livelihood. Large searches involving vehicles, dogs, and volunteers could damage crops or disrupt operations. In rural areas, some landowners may also grow marijuana in remote spots. Even if rare, the risk of legal trouble could deter cooperation. Others may have worried about undocumented wells or structures that could raise liability issues. Distrust of law enforcement plays a role too. Some simply don't want police on their property. Refusing access doesn't always imply guilt. It may reflect a desire to avoid trouble, especially in those tight-knit communities. Legally, property owners are within their rights. Without probable cause or a warrant, police can't search private land, even in a missing person case. When land is tied to income, people are often more protective. This limited access may have hindered the search for Brandon's phone, which rang until the next day before going to voicemail. Despite efforts, it was never recovered. After researching this case for countless hours, I've reached the conclusion that Brandon Swanson did not drown immediately upon reaching the Yellow Medicine River. Though he reportedly heard water and may have slipped in, his trail continuing beyond the river indicates he remained mobile and was still trying to find help. The fact that his call stayed connected and his phone kept ringing until the next day suggests it wasn't submerged or damaged right away. This challenges the idea that he died near the river and instead points to him moving deeper into remote terrain. Dogs eventually lost the trail at a freshly graded road, a detail some have used to support vehicle theories. However, these theories lack hard evidence. A more likely explanation is that the grading disrupted the scent due to machinery odors, disturbed soil, and the delay of 2 years before dogs were brought in. Adding to the speculation, some suggested that the scent on nearby farming equipment meant Brandon was run over. Yet there is no physical evidence to support this claim. The more plausible explanation is that the machinery had simply passed through an area where Brandon had walked, leaving behind trace scent the dogs later detected. The conditions that night also cannot be ignored. With temperatures near 40 degrees Fahrenheit, no shelter, and soaked clothing, Brandon would have quickly become disoriented and weak. Hypothermia likely began setting in as he pushed on through farmland after crossing the river. By the time he reached the swampy terrain of Mud Creek, he was probably already in its early stages. In the absence of direct evidence, the most compelling explanation is that he collapsed there. This conclusion is further supported by cadaver dogs, which showed strong and repeated interest in the Mud Creek area. Despite poor visibility and difficult terrain, the dogs consistently returned to this spot. Unfortunately, dense vegetation, shifting winds, and seasonal flooding made the area nearly impossible to search thoroughly. Compounding these challenges were landowner refusals that left key areas inaccessible. Search efforts were also restricted by seasonal factors such as planting and harvest schedules. Together, these natural and logistical obstacles have kept significant sections of land untouched, reinforcing the possibility that Brandon made it farther than initially believed, yet remains undiscovered. So what do you guys think really happened?